Hello everybody, welcome along to this video. It's Mr. Johnson teaches Macbeth, the context with hubris and Greek tragedy. They're two sort of broader themes which can gain you higher marks if you're writing about them in the right way in your answers. And also hubris is really fundamental and basic sort of block for understanding Macbeth and what he is about as a character as well. And also his wife. Quick reminder, Macbeth is part of your English Literature GCSE. You'll find it in paper 1, section A, and that makes it the first exam that you sit for your English. Now what you're going to want to do before we go too much further is have pen and paper ready. It's really important that you make notes as we go along. There are some questions at the end of this video to test your own knowledge of what you've seen and heard, but as I said, it's really important that you make your own notes because then you've got something to look back on when you're doing your final bits of revision for this play. So without further ado, let's move on in and just talk briefly that the context, what we're talking about today, it falls under assessment objective 3, and while you don't necessarily need to know that or remember that, it's just sort of an extra layer of marks that you can achieve in the exam. They don't want you to just be sort of coughing up and regurgitating facts and sort of yigs and everything like that, but as I put in the yellow box there, they want to see you show an understanding of how the time and the events of 1606 affect how the audience viewed it and also how Shakespeare wrote it. He was writing it for an audience who were living at that time, so how he wrote it is going to be different to maybe how he would have written it today. So things to bear in mind then about a Jacobean audience. By Jacobean, that's the name we give to the era and the time that Shakespeare's plays were performed, although technically some were Elizabethan. Macbeth falls under the Jacobean period, so we're going to call them the Jacobean audience, and there's a modern audience standing in the modern globe in the background of the photograph. And things you need to know. Firstly, the audience there were largely illiterate. That means that they couldn't read or write. Now that means that books were expensive at this time anyway, but they wouldn't have been able to access any form of writing. They would have heard stories from the Bible being read to them in church and heard those, but beyond that there was no real forms of entertainment available to them. Therefore, as I've put on my second bullet point, the theatre was a cheaper form of entertainment. It was a way of sort of actually firstly meeting up with friends and everybody, let's go see the latest play and having a chat while you're waiting for it to start. But also, as it was cheap, the people standing up there, the groundlings as they were called, they would only have to pay a penny to enter, and therefore, although it's a different sort of amount to what you think of as a penny today, it still was cheap comparatively, and therefore that's how they got their entertainment. Therefore, they also would have seen quite likely a number of plays. It doesn't mean that every Jacobean person saw loads of plays, but generally speaking, they were popular, the plays, and there were many of them. It wasn't just Shakespeare, there were many, many writers. But the point I'm trying to make there is, as they would have seen a number of plays, they would have got to have known a number of classical characters, but also they would have understood the basic plots of comedies and tragedies. Tragedies particularly followed a real structure and a real set of events, and the audience would have known, roughly speaking, what to expect. So that's something to know about the Jacobean audience. They were knowledgeable and they were good listeners as well, and they had to be because some of them would have been standing up for hours watching these plays. Right, let's move on then. Greek tragedy is what I want to talk to you about here as well, and just give you a little bit of information around it. So as I've said on the screen there, Greek tragedies originated in around 5 BC. So this is the 500 years, before Christ, so before the year 0. But also, as it says in the name, ancient Greece is what we're talking about here, and that's the origin of where they would come from. I've put a picture down in the bottom right there. That's sort of an ancient Greek amphitheatre which has survived to this day, or bits of it certainly are. And what I've put there is these tragedies were popular and they influenced writers like Shakespeare, who borrowed sort of the characters and borrowed some of the plots and put them into their own works. So they were inspiration for writers like Shakespeare. Now the bit in the middle there says an Aristotelian tragic hero. So Aristotle was one of these writers, one of these ancient Greek writers, and a tragic hero must possess specific characteristics. Macbeth is a very good example of a tragic hero. Although he starts off as a hero and starts off very noble and worthy and sort of somebody that we should like, through the course of the play, because of the things he does, his life turns into a tragedy, and ultimately he has a tragic ending, which is why he is a tragic hero. And according to Aristotle's works, a tragic hero would need to possess some specific characteristics, and there are 5 of them on the screen there, and I'm just going to touch on some of them in more detail. Firstly, they need to have a flaw or an error of judgment, something which made them not perfect, something which was wrong about them, and that in brackets is called hamartia, and that is a word you absolutely can use when talking about Macbeth. A reversal of fortune, perhaps, peripeteia, but I'm not going to focus on that one too much, nor am I going to focus on the third one too much. It's there on the screen for you to pause and have a look at as well. 4 is really important, and that's the title of this video. Excessive pride, which I'll go into in a little bit more in a minute, but that's hubris. And then finally, the character's fate must be greater than deserved. So often they died, very often in horrible circumstances. And if you think back to the ending of the play of Macbeth, he is beheaded at the end, and it doesn't get too much more gruesome than that. Hubris then, I'll come on to the pictures in a second for you, but this is worth noting down somewhere and even pausing this video. A personality displaying extreme foolish pride or dangerous overconfidence. It's often linked with arrogance as well. So somebody, if I don't write this, but basically too full of themselves, so confident that, and you don't write this one either, but almost like cocky in the sort of, they're so confident. Within ancient Greece, this linked with defying or challenging the gods I've put there. So this arrogance almost made them seem better than, and sort of in competition with the ancient gods, which is why the gods would punish them. That's not so much true and needed to know from Macbeth and Shakespeare, but that's sort of the background knowledge for you. Why have I got a picture of Jafar from Aladdin here? I think he's probably the best example of a character I thought many of you would know who really does display this hubris. Mainly towards the end of the play, perhaps. He's a very arrogant character throughout and believe in like how self-belief is so strong. But then he is tricked into believing that actually to be the most powerful person he needs to be a genie. And it's the fact that he was tricked into making himself into a genie and therefore he became trapped in the lamp. That is hubris, because he believed that he needed to be more powerful than everyone else, and he didn't look at what the consequences were going to be. He was swept away in his own sort of wanting to be important. And there is a parallel there with Macbeth. Nothing to do with genies, of course, but the witches trick him into sort of making decisions which ultimately lead to his downfall. And I won't say too much more on that because that's what will be on my next slide, in fact, as well. But there's hubris. If you haven't done so, pause it or go back to this and make notes on that, because you can absolutely talk about Macbeth and his links to hubris. So I've put on the screen here. After his first murder of the king, Macbeth becomes increasingly confident but also desperate as well. And I put there, he allows ambition and power to blind him to his choices and the consequences of his choices. He almost becomes so confident, particularly, as I put on the third bullet point, his hubris is particularly visible in Acts 4 and 5. So that's middle end of the play, where he appears most overconfident, I would say, and it's linked with the witches' prophecies. Because they tell him, Macbeth, no one not born of woman can harm you, and you've got nothing to be afraid until Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane. And he says, beware Macduff. He feels that these predictions are so unlikely to become true that there's nothing stopping him. And that's where his own self-belief and arrogance and confidence in the witches as well allows him to lead to his downfall. So I've tried to phrase it for you in the last bit really, which is how you maybe use the word hubris. Somebody who has hubris is hubristic. That's the adjective as well. So the fourth bullet point there. Ultimately, his hubristic nature leads to his hamartia. Now remember from the previous slides, hamartia is his downfall, like his grisly, unpleasant end. So his hubristic nature leads to his hamartia. It's a punishment for being led by the instruments of darkness. That's a quote I've taken from the play. That's what Banquo describes the witches as. So by listening to the witches, Macbeth is choosing the wrong path. And Shakespeare has to show us that somebody who does that in life is going to be punished. That there will be consequences for your actions. That's one of the key messages of the play. So here are some key questions for you to have a go at then. Pause this slide, write them into your book, and then if you're really uncertain of an answer, go back through the video and you will be able to find it somewhere. I'm just double checking, scanning over those now. So number 2, for example, why they might go to an audience gone to plays. That has something to do with the fact that maybe they couldn't read books. So think of the word that I used on the slide further back there. And otherwise, yep, I think that all of those would be answerable based if you've listened all the way through. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to say thank you very much for choosing to watch this video. There are multiple other videos across my channel covering all sorts of aspects, so check some of those out as well. And above all, I wish you the very best of luck when it comes to your exams. Remember, with knowledge like this hubris, it's not just about dropping the word in, it's trying to explain, like I did on the 4th bullet point a minute ago on the slide. It's about trying to explain the ideas and linking them to Macbeth. Anyway, that's it from me, so I'd say thank you very much for your time, and goodbye.